Pam Bondi sat in her car, parked across from the massive county courthouse. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, but her face remained composed. Today, she was heading into a trial that could change everything. Judge Michael Davis, a man who had spent years making favorable rulings for the wealthy, covering up the crimes of the powerful, was about to face the public in his own courtroom. Her informants had revealed that Davis had been taking bribes, manipulating juries, and fabricating cases. Yet every previous attempt to expose him had failed. He had influential friends and a spotless reputation among the elite. Pam took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. She could already feel the reporters' eyes on her, waiting in front of the courthouse. Microphones stretched toward her, camera flashes blinding her. Ms. Bondi, do you really believe you have evidence against Judge Davis? Is it true that he accepted bribes from developers? Do you think the judicial system will allow you to win this case? She stopped, looking directly into one reporter's camera. I believe in justice. And today, we'll see if Judge Davis does too. She turned and, without another word, strode determinedly toward the courthouse doors. Inside, the building greeted her with cold marble and hushed whispers. Her client, David Hansen, was already seated in the courtroom. He was one of those the system had tried to destroy, an entrepreneur who had refused to pay bribes, and then suddenly found himself facing false charges. His company had been shut down, his accounts frozen, and he had barely escaped prison. Pam nodded at him, but David looked defeated. His eyes were full of doubt. Do you really think this will change anything? He whispered. Pam leaned in closer. I don't think. I know. The courtroom doors swung open, and Judge Davis entered. He looked as confident as ever, his suit immaculate, his silver hair neatly combed back. But in his eyes there was something new, a faint shadow of unease. The trial began. Pam was the first to speak. She laid out dozens of documents, phone records, and witness testimonies before the court. She saw Davis clench his jaw slightly when evidence of his dealings with developers was revealed. But he still held firm. Then she played her trump card. I call Caroline Grayson to the stand. The courtroom fell silent. Caroline had been Davis's former secretary. She had disappeared 2 years ago after hinting to journalists that she had incriminating evidence against the judge. Everyone assumed she had either fled or been silenced. When she walked into the courtroom, Davis paled. I was forced into silence. Caroline's voice trembled, but she held her gaze steady. But I'm not afraid anymore. For the first time in the entire trial, Judge Davis looked genuinely shaken. Pam knew this was only the beginning. Judge Davis forced himself to hold Caroline's gaze, but his fingers clenched the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. A heavy silence filled the courtroom. Miss Grayson, his voice was steady, but Pam noticed him swallow hard. You claim to have information that proves my guilt? Caroline didn't look away. Yes, Your Honor. Her voice was firm. I personally witnessed you receiving envelopes of cash from representatives of construction companies. I saw you altering court rulings in favor of those who paid you. And I have proof. She pulled a flash drive from her bag and handed it to the court clerk. Davis shook his head, his lips curling into a barely perceptible smirk. This is ridiculous. If you really had evidence, you would have presented it earlier. Pam smiled, cold and confident. You made sure Miss Grayson disappeared, didn't you? Davis didn't respond. But we found her, Pam continued. And more importantly, she managed to send copies of these files to several independent journalists. A loud murmur spread through the courtroom. Davis was beginning to lose control. This is a lie. His voice rose sharply. This is a conspiracy against me. The court will review this evidence, the presiding judge said curtly, cutting him off. The courtroom doors suddenly swung open. 2 uniformed officers entered. One of them stepped toward Judge Davis. Michael Davis, you are under arrest on suspicion of corruption, fraud, and abuse of power. The room erupted in shouting and camera flashes. Davis sprang from his seat, his face flushed with rage. This is a farce. I won't let you destroy my life. But the officers had already locked the handcuffs around his wrists. Pam watched as the man who had evaded justice for years finally got what he deserved. As Davis was escorted out, he turned to her. You'll regret this, he hissed. Pam just shrugged. We'll see. As the officers dragged Judge Davis toward the exit, he struggled, his eyes flashing with fury. You have no right. This is a conspiracy, he shouted, trying to break free from the handcuffs. The presiding judge banged the gavel loudly. Order in the court. But the room was in chaos. Lawyers, journalists, and spectators whispered among themselves, discussing the shocking turn of events. This isn't over. Davis's voice was sharp, tinged with panic. This entire case is a filthy manipulation. The evidence is fabricated. He turned to his lawyer, a thin man in a perfectly tailored suit who looked momentarily rattled, but quickly regained his composure. Your Honor, the lawyer called out. We demand an immediate dismissal of this charade. We have proof that the flash drive Miss Grayson presented was planted by interested parties. The courtroom fell silent. Pam's head snapped up. What kind of nonsense is this? Davis's lawyer pulled documents from his briefcase and handed them to the judge. Here is testimony stating that the flash drive was found in a law firm building closely connected to the prosecution. This is an attempt to discredit my client. Pam smiled. She had been expecting something like this. And you really think the flash drive is the only evidence? Her voice was cold and steady, carrying an unspoken challenge. The lawyer flinched, and Davis locked eyes with her. We have bank statements, phone call records, and even surveillance footage, Pam continued. So go ahead, try to squirm your way out of this. The presiding judge reviewed the documents handed to him. Given these new claims, the court will recess to examine the materials. He struck the gavel, and everyone in the courtroom rose. Davis turned his head toward Pam. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed he might break his own teeth. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, he hissed. Pam leaned in closer, her eyes glinting with icy fire. No, it's you who doesn't understand. Davis took a deep breath and, just before being let out, said, If I go down, I'm taking you with me. Pam didn't respond. She knew the fight was only beginning. The court recess lasted nearly an hour. Pam waited, watching as Davis's lawyers frantically flipped through papers, whispering among themselves. They were up to something. That much was clear. When the judge returned, he sighed wearily and struck the gavel. The session is resumed. Davis no longer looked shaken. On the contrary, there was a glint of malice in his eyes. His lawyer stood up. Your Honor, given the new circumstances, we wish to call an unexpected witness. A witness? The judge repeated. Yes, a former prosecutor's office employee who can testify to Ms. Bondi's abuse of power. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Pam didn't move. She was waiting for the blow. The doors opened, and a tall man in a dark suit entered. Pam recognized him. Gary Thompson, her former colleague, the one she had once removed for corruption. He took the oath and sat in the witness chair. Davis's lawyer approached. Mr. Thompson, are you familiar with Ms. Bondi? Yes. We worked together at the prosecutor's office. Are you aware of any instances where she broke the law for personal gain? Gary smirked. Oh, I know plenty. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The judge struck the gavel. Explain. Gary pulled documents from his pocket. These are phone records. They prove that Ms. Bondi leaked confidential information to third parties. Pam remained composed, though her heart was pounding. She knew this was a setup. Objection, she called out. These so-called evidence are fabricated. Davis's lawyer smiled calmly. Your Honor, we have another witness who can confirm this. The air in the courtroom grew tense, like the calm before a storm. The doors opened again. Linda Carter walked in. Her former friend. Damn, Pam muttered under her breath. Linda lifted her head and met her gaze. I will tell the whole truth, she said. The court was turning into a trap. But Pam was ready to fight to the end. Pam calmly surveyed the courtroom. The jurors' faces were tense, but there was no condemnation in their eyes yet. She knew that if she showed weakness now, Davis and his team would crush her. Linda Carter sat in the witness chair, folding her hands on her lap. She was nervous, but trying to hide it. Davis's lawyer stepped closer. Ms. Carter, tell the court what you know about Ms. Bondi's actions. Linda nodded and took a deep breath. I worked with her for several years. We were close friends. But over time, I started noticing that she abused her position. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Silence. The judge barked. Pam's expression didn't change. She could see Linda was uneasy. Please continue, the lawyer encouraged softly. Linda swallowed. She passed information to certain people who could use it for their own benefit. I saw her receiving envelopes. Objection. Pam's voice cut through the silence like a blade. These are baseless accusations without evidence. The judge frowned. Do you have evidence? Davis's lawyer smirked and handed documents to the judge. Here are bank statements. You will see that large sums were deposited into Ms. Bondi's account by private individuals. The jurors exchanged glances. Pam knew she had to act now, or she would lose this case. She stood up. Your Honor, may I question the witness? The judge nodded. Pam slowly approached Linda. Ms. Carter, you claim you saw me with envelopes. Where exactly did this happen? Linda blinked. In your office. In which month? It happened several times. Name at least one exact date. Linda hesitated. I don't remember. Strange. You came here to accuse me, yet you can't recall a single date? Soft whispers spread through the courtroom. Pam stepped closer. You are under oath, Ms. Carter. Don't you think false testimony could become a serious problem? Linda pressed her lips together. Pam could feel her cracking. Is it true that 2 months ago, you yourself were accused of financial fraud, but the case suddenly disappeared? Linda flinched. Pam swiftly turned to the judge. Your Honor, this woman is a bribed witness. I have evidence that she received money from people connected to Davis. She threw documents onto the table. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The judge slammed his gavel. Order in the court. Davis's lawyer shot to his feet. This is absurd. It's the truth. Pam turned to the jurors. Judge Davis wants to destroy me because I expose his crimes. He is using bribed witnesses and fabricated evidence. But the truth always comes to light. Linda was breathing heavily. She was scared. Ms. Carter, Pam's voice was cold. If you confess now, I can help you get protection from prosecution. Linda shut her eyes. Her shoulders trembled. And then she whispered, He forced me. Gasps of shock filled the room. The judge leaned forward. Who is he? Linda lifted her eyes. Davis. He threatened me. The courtroom exploded. The judge banged the gavel. Pam allowed herself the faintest smile. This wasn't over, but today she had landed a serious blow. The courtroom was in turmoil. The judge struck the gavel, but even that couldn't stop the chaos. Davis had gone pale. He turned to his lawyer, who was whispering something nervously in his ear. Linda Carter sat with her head lowered. Her hands trembled. She had just betrayed the man who had controlled her, but now she had nothing left to lose. At last, the judge restored order. Ms. Carter, do you realize that you have just accused a federal judge of crimes? Linda nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And I am ready to provide evidence. The jurors held their breath. Davis stood up. Your Honor, this is slander. You are allowing a circus in your courtroom. But this time, his voice lacked its usual confidence. Pam Bondi smiled. Your Honor, I demand an immediate investigation. Furthermore, given these new circumstances, I request that all charges against me be dismissed as fabricated. The judge studied her for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Davis. The court is in recess. But I warn you, Judge Davis, if these allegations are proven, you will be facing something far worse than just a ruined reputation. Davis clenched his jaw. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Pam stepped closer and whispered. And you have no idea what I'm capable of when someone tries to destroy me. 2 months later, Davis was officially removed from office. His case was handed over to federal prosecutors, and all charges against Pam Bondi were fully dropped. Linda Carter entered witness protection and left town. Pam stood outside the courthouse, inhaling the crisp air. She had won. But she knew that in this world, justice was never given freely. It had to be fought for, and she was ready to do it again and again. She got into her car and drove away, leaving this chapter behind. But in her eyes, a new fire was already burning. This was just another battle. The war for justice was far from over.